Right. We're going to read for the gist with our new book, A Wicked History, Stalin. You'll see that I've provided some vocabulary terms here. You'll want to take a look at those before we get started. Let's take a look at the first few pages. The author provides us with a map of what's called the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is what the world called Russia after Stalin took over. So as you can see here, the Soviet Union occupies a huge amount of land. And remember, most of that land, when Tsar Nicholas was the ruler, Tsar Nicholas II, was owned by the nobles. If we look down here, we can see a little bit about who was in Stalin's life. So we can see his parents. His parents were actually just regular people. They were not rulers or royalty or anything like that. Stalin came from just a regular family. He was married a couple of times. He had some kids. We see some of his officers, like high-ranking officials that served with him. And then we can also see some world leaders who were in power at the same time that Stalin was. So, like for the United States, for example, Truman was the president. And then another word you'll hear a lot is Hitler's name. And then the other president, while Stalin was in power, was FDR or Roosevelt. So those are some names that might come up. All right, let's get started reading our first chapter. Kolpashevo, Soviet Union, May 1979. In 1979, the spring melt swelled the waters of the Ob River, which snakes across the frozen tundra of Siberia in central Russia. The rising waters licked away at the river's sandy banks near the town of Kolpashevo. As the current eroded the riverbanks, it unearthed a secret that had been buried there for decades. Human skeletons began to tumble from the ground. Half-frozen, mummified bodies surfaced in the layer below the skeletons. Many of the remains slid into the river. The secret police of the Soviet Union, the feared KGB, appeared quickly on the scene. They roped off the area and hurried to make the nightmarish vision disappear. They forced local residents to tie weights to the bodies and sink them in the river. The dead, the KGB claimed, were military deserters executed after World War II. Although few people believed the story, no one argued with the KGB agents. 60 years of communist rule had taught the Soviet people to keep their mouths shut. People who dared to question official stories flirted with arrest, or worse. But the people of Kolpashevo knew the truth. The local secret police headquarters had once stood above the spot along the broad river. In the late 1930s, friends, relatives, and neighbors had been corralled in mass arrests and led behind the gates of the headquarters. There, they were shot in the back of the head and shoveled into a mass grave. Evidence of the grisly executions lay buried in the riverbanks until that spring of 1979. In the preserved corpses, some Kolpashevo residents recognized people they knew, journalist Adam Hochschild reported years later. Still wearing the same shoes and clothes they had been arrested in some 40 years earlier. The dead of Kolpashevo had been consumed in a campaign of terror inspired by a single man, Joseph Stalin. In his 25 years of rule, from 1928 to 1953, Stalin and the communist leadership hammered the underdeveloped Soviet Union into an atomic superpower. But they built their empire on the bodies of millions of victims. Some died behind gates, like those in Kolpashevo, executed for crimes real or imagined. Others were worked to death in bleak prison camps. Millions more died of starvation and a famine caused by Stalin's cold-blooded policies. The true story of Stalin's rule, like the secrets of Kolpashevo, lay buried for decades. In recent years, it has emerged as one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century. So this is a little bit of a graphic photo, so I apologize if that's a little too graphic for you. You can X out of the video. But this is a photograph. Let's look at the caption here. In 1940, Stalin's secret police executed 15,000 Polish military officers who had been taken prisoner during the first months of World War II. German officers discovered a mass grave filled with thousands of these officers in Katyn Forest in 1943 above.